Thanks, guys. So this is going to kind of build on what Abby was talking about too. I'm going to talk about the ecotox of two herders today, both the thick slick and also the OP40. Yesterday, Tim Stefik did a great job on going through what the NCP subpart J is all about. I don't want to go too much into this, but just to remind you, it is a list maintained by the EPA. It's a list of controlled devices and substances that are used to remove or control oil discharges. Just because something is on the list doesn't mean that it's approved to be used. It's just that it can be, maybe approved to be used. There are multiple things: dispersants, bioremediation agents, surface washing agents, and only two herders: Siltec OP40 and Thick Slick 6535. So just to tell you a little bit about these two formulations, Siltec OP40 is a higher molecular weight organosilicone surfactant made up of an ethoxylated heptamethyl trisiloxane. It's 100% just that single component. Thick Slick 6535 is made up of two components: 65% of a non-ionic surfactant called sorbitan monolaurate, which is also known as SPAN20. This surfactant is also similar to the surfactants in Corexit. And then 35% of an aliphatic alcohol solvent. This is really just to make that surfactant, be able to actually be applied and movable and go through nozzles. This is just a slide. I just want to show you the chemical structures, of these two surfactants and their constituents. Here is just a table of different physical properties and environmental fates of these two herders. So for comparison, some of these data are actually measured data and some of them are model data. You have the log KOW, water solubility, vapor pressure, and then also its biodegradation potential. So when you compare Thick Slick 6535 to Siltec OP40, Thick Slick is more water soluble and has a lower octanol water partition coefficient. And this is important because log KOW can be used as a proxy for ecotox. And then Thick Slick also has a higher biodegradation potential. It is readily biodegradable. Tim presented some of that data in his presentation initially. And it can degrade within days to weeks. And this is compared to Siltec OP40, which is not readily biodegradable. It will take about weeks to months to biodegrade in the environment. Based upon just looking at the log KOW, Thick Slick is expected to exhibit a lower aquatic toxicity than Siltec, and I'll show you some of the data that we found and see if that aligns. So what Tom Parker, Tin, and I did is that we just scoured the literature and tried to find any sort of measured data on not only the formulations but the individual components of Thick Slick as well. So we reviewed peer-reviewed publications, technical reports, governmental reports, and then included a reliability assessment on that as well. Then we used all that data and then used a model called the interspecies correlation, and that allowed us to predict the ecotox of species that weren't listed in the literature. So this is just an example of a table of some of the data that we found. I'm not really going to go through this. I just wanted to show you that this is what we're doing. I'm only going to show you a table of a subset of the Thick Slick 6535. So each row is one study that we found, one species, where we basically just listed the effect endpoint and the LC50, and then the organism that was tested. We compiled all this data into different box plots for comparison. So on the y-axis, you'll see the LC50s, and if you note, there's different axes. So you'll see Siltec OP40, all that literature that we found is combined in there, and the range of LC50s is presented. And then on the second graph over, you'll see the LC50s of Thick Slick 6535, and then the individual components of Thick Slick, the alcohol, and then the SPAN20. We also wanted to include data of Corexit 9500 just for comparison, just because I'm sure you guys can, it's just good to have that. But one thing that is important about that comparison is just how the volume that we're actually applying here. So the volume of herder that we're applying is, almost 2 magnitudes lower than the volume of Praxis that will be applied. So as you can see from this data, well, first I want to remind you that the lower the LC50, the more toxic it is. So as you can see from the data on the left-hand side, Siltec OB40 has the lowest LC50, making it, the most toxic to aquatic organisms compared to thick slick and then Corexit. You can also see if you compare the thick slick to the 2 individual components, that the toxicity of thick slick is really driven by the span 20 here. So, the prior graph was just a culmination of many different species. This graph just shows you one species per group, and then it looks at the LC50, compares the LC50 within that species. You'll see a similar trend here that the ecotox through aquatic species of thick slick is not as toxic to aquatic organisms as Siltec or Corexit. And again, remember that the volume that's applied here as well. That, the herders obviously are going to be applied at a much lower volume than Corexit. So, in summary here, herder application results in very low and short-term water column exposures. Herders are not persistent and are subject to degradation. Considerable aquatic toxicity data are available to provide a technical basis to establish water quality objectives to protect aquatic life. And moving forward here, what we want to do is, what we hope to do is maybe through the NPR project, we can take some water samples. They're applying herders offshore for in-situ burning. What we would like to do is take those water samples and actually measure field concentrations of herders. That is a data point that doesn't exist at all in the literature, and it's really important for us to use that to inform response. One of the challenges there is that there's no analytical methods to actually measure these surfactant compounds, these herder formulations at the low concentrations that we expect to be in those water samples. So that's one of our goals right now, is to develop those analytical methods. So when we hopefully do get those samples, we'll be able to analyze them. We also would like to get some burn residue samples and look at the effects of those burn residues following in situ burning. And then we do a comparative risk assessment of oil spill response scenarios with and without herder use. That's it.